number she spent her last $500 to save him the next day. He bought her hospital. The blizzard tore through Millbrook, Kansas like a wounded beast, howling through empty streets and rattling the windows of St. Mary's Hospital. At 2:47 in the morning, the shrill wail of an ambulance siren cut through the winter silence, a sound that made Sarah Miller's heart skip a beat as she stood at the nurse's station during her 18th consecutive night shift. St. Mary's Hospital was dying, just like so many of the patients it struggled to save. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting sickly shadows on peeling paint and cracked linoleum floors. The smell of industrial disinfectant couldn't quite mask the underlying scent of desperation that seemed to seep from the very walls. This place had been Sarah's second home for 10 years, and now it felt more like a tomb waiting to be sealed. The automatic doors burst open with a violent whoosh, letting in a blast of Arctic air and swirling snow. 2 paramedics rushed in, wheeling a gurney that carried an unconscious young man, his dark hair matted with blood, a white bandage wrapped around his head already soaked crimson. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she glimpsed his face. For just a moment, in the harsh hospital lighting, he looked exactly like Michael, her younger brother who had died in this very same emergency room 10 years ago. Dr. Peterson, the head of emergency medicine, took one look at the patient and shook his head grimly. He needs immediate surgery for a severe head trauma, but we need to know about insurance first. The paramedic handed over a clipboard with nearly empty forms. No identification, no insurance cards, nothing. We found him in a ditch about 20 miles outside town. His car must have slid off the road in the storm. The phone on the nurse's station rang with the harsh electronic tone that Sarah had come to dread. She picked it up, already knowing what she would hear. "This is Morrison from billing," came the cold, bureaucratic voice of the hospital's financial director. "The unidentified patient in emergency room 2. What's his insurance status?" Sarah glanced at the forms and felt her heart sink. "He doesn't have any identification or insurance information, sir." There was a pause, then Morrison's voice returned, as unforgiving as winter itself. "Then you know the policy. No $500 deposit, no surgery. Those are the rules, and I don't make exceptions." Sarah stared at the man on the gurney, watching his chest rise and fall in shallow, labored breaths. In her mind, she could hear Michael's voice from that terrible night a decade ago when he lay dying because their family couldn't afford the $5,000 surgery that might have saved him. "Sarah," he had whispered with his last breath, blood frothing at the corners of his mouth. "Don't let anyone else die like this. Promise me." She had made that promise, and it had shaped every day of her life since. Her hands trembling, Sarah reached into her worn leather wallet and pulled out 5 $100 bills. It was her rent money, the last $500 she had in the world. She had been surviving on instant noodles and peanut butter sandwiches for weeks, working 3 jobs to make ends meet while still finding ways to help patients who couldn't afford their medications. But looking at this stranger's face, seeing Michael's features reflected there, she knew she had no choice. "I'll cover the deposit," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Peterson looked at her in shock. "Sarah, you can't afford this. We don't even know who he is." She placed the money on the counter with steady hands, even though her heart was racing. "We know he's human. We know he's dying. That's enough for me. Start the surgery." The operation lasted 4 grueling hours. Sarah paced the hallways like a caged animal, unable to focus on her other duties, checking the clock every few minutes. At 4:30 in the morning, the patient's heart stopped for the first time. The shriek of the cardiac monitor echoed through the corridors, and Sarah felt her own heart stop with it. Through the observation window, she watched the medical team perform CPR, their movements efficient but desperate. After 5 endless minutes, the heart monitor returned to its steady beeping. But at 5:45, complications arose. The patient was bleeding into his brain, and Dr. Peterson's hands were shaking as he fought to control the hemorrhage. Sarah could see the defeat in his eyes when he glanced toward the observation window. She knew that look. It was the same expression she had seen on her brother's doctor's face all those years ago. At 6:20 in the morning, the heart monitor flatlined again. This time, the silence stretched longer, more ominously. Sarah couldn't stand outside any longer. She burst through the doors of the operating room, ignoring the protests of the surgical staff. "Let me talk to him," she cried, rushing to the patient's side. She took his pale, cold hand in both of hers, her tears falling freely onto the sterile green surgical drapes. "Please, don't die," she whispered urgently. "I lost my brother because we didn't have money for his surgery. I can't lose you too. You have family somewhere who loves you. You have dreams you haven't fulfilled yet. Please, please fight. Come back to us." Whether it was coincidence or miracle, the monitor began beeping again. The patient's heart resumed its rhythm, stronger and more steady than before. Dr. Peterson looked at Sarah with amazement. "I've never seen anything like that," he murmured. "It's like he heard you." By 7:30 in the morning, the surgery was complete and successful. Sarah sat beside the patient's bed in the recovery room, exhausted but unable to leave. When he finally opened his eyes, the most striking blue eyes she had ever seen, the first thing he saw was her face looking down at him with concern and relief. "You saved me," he said, his voice hoarse from the breathing tube. His accent was refined, educated, not what she would have expected from someone found unconscious in a ditch. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Sarah smiled through her tears. "Because every life has value, because someone, somewhere, would be devastated to lose you. And because I made a promise to my brother that I would never let anyone die the way he did, not if I could help it." The man studied her face intently, as if trying to memorize every detail. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Sarah Miller," she replied. "And yours?" He was quiet for a long moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Alex," he said finally. "I think my name is Alex, but I can't remember much else." Over the next week, Sarah spent every free moment with Alex, helping him recover from his injuries and temporary amnesia. She brought him homemade soup, read him books about the history of Millbrook, and told him stories about the patients she had cared for over the years. Despite his memory loss, there was something about Alex that intrigued her. The way he held his fork, the careful way he chose his words, the expensive watch that had been damaged in the accident, all suggested a background very different from the homeless drifter the hospital staff assumed him to be. "I feel like I've been running from something," Alex confided to Sarah one evening as they watched the snow fall outside his hospital room window. "But I can't remember what. All I know is that for the first time in my life, I feel at peace. When I'm with you, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Sarah felt her heart flutter in a way it never had before. At 29, she had never allowed herself to fall in love. Her life had been dedicated entirely to caring for others, to honoring Michael's memory by saving as many lives as possible. But with Alex, something was different. He looked at her not as a caregiver or a means to an end, but as a woman worthy of love and admiration. "I don't deserve your kindness," Alex said one morning as Sarah helped him with his physical therapy exercises. "You used your last $500 to save a complete stranger. That money must have been important to you." Sarah shook her head. "It was my rent money, but I don't regret it for a second. Seeing you alive and getting stronger, it makes me feel like Michael is somehow alive again, too." As Alex regained his strength, mysterious things began to happen. Well-dressed men in expensive cars were seen circling the hospital, asking questions about a patient named Carter. Alex became agitated whenever he saw black sedans, though he couldn't explain why. "There's something I'm supposed to remember," he told Sarah. "Something important. But every time I try to grasp it, it slips away." On the day of Alex's discharge, he took Sarah's hands in his and looked deeply into her eyes. "I have to leave," he said, his voice filled with regret. "I need to find out who I really am, what I was running from. But I promise you, Sarah Miller, I will come back. You saved my life, and now I need to figure out how to deserve that gift." Sarah nodded, her heart breaking even as she smiled. "I'll be here," she whispered. "No matter what you discover about yourself, remember that the man I came to know in this hospital room is a good man. Hold on to that." A week after Alex left, Sarah's world began to crumble. St. Mary's Hospital received its final closure notice. In 30 days, the doors would close forever. 60% of the staff, including Sarah, received pink slips effective immediately. The letter cited budgetary constraints and declining patient volume as the reasons for the closure, but Sarah knew the truth. Great Care Corporation had been circling the hospital like vultures for months, waiting to buy the property and tear down the building to construct a shopping center. The eviction notice came the same day. Sarah had exactly 72 hours to pay her back rent or be forced onto the street. The $500 she had used to save Alex's life had been her rent money, and she had been unable to catch up since losing her job. Her former boyfriend David appeared at her apartment door that evening, smugly offering her a way out. "I told you this would happen," he said, looking around her tiny, shabby apartment with disdain. "Your bleeding heart has finally gotten you into real trouble. Come back to me, Sarah. I have money, a nice house, a secure future. I can take care of you." Sarah looked at him with disappointment rather than anger. "You have everything, David, except the one thing that matters most. You don't have a heart." The next morning brought news that shattered what remained of Sarah's composure. Her best friend Lisa called, sobbing hysterically. "Sarah, it's Emma. She's having a severe asthma attack, and the hospital won't treat her without insurance. They want $5,000 up front, and I don't have it. Please, you have to help me. She's only 5 years old." Sarah drove through the blizzard for 60 miles to the nearest hospital that might treat Emma, but by the time they arrived, it was too late. The little girl had died in her mother's arms in the car, her tiny lungs finally giving up their struggle. Sarah held Lisa as she sobbed, feeling the weight of failure crushing down on her. She had saved a stranger, but couldn't save her best friend's daughter. That night, Sarah sat alone in the darkened nurses' station at St. Mary's, staring at the empty desk where she had once placed her last $500. The hospital felt like a mausoleum now, its halls echoing with the ghosts of all the lives that had been saved and lost within these walls. "Michael," she whispered into the darkness, "I don't know if I did the right thing anymore. I saved one life, but I couldn't save Emma. What kind of nurse am I if I can't protect the people I love most?" The next morning, Hospital Administrator Morrison called Sarah into his office with a cruel smile on his face. "Miss Miller, your unauthorized financial guarantee for the unidentified patient was a violation of hospital policy. We could pursue legal action against you for that breach. Furthermore, you now owe St. Mary's $15,000 for the patient's surgical costs. Do you have the money to pay that debt?" Sarah stared at him in shock. She had saved a man's life, and now she was being threatened with a lawsuit and financial ruin. "I don't have that kind of money," she admitted quietly. Morrison's smile widened. "Then I'm afraid we'll have to pursue all available legal remedies to collect this debt. Good day, Miss Miller." News of the hospital's closure spread through Millbrook like wildfire. The elderly residents, the families with young children, the workers who couldn't afford to travel 60 miles for medical care, all gathered in the hospital parking lot to protest. But their voices were small against the power of corporate interests and financial pressure. Mrs. Watson, a 78-year-old woman with a weak heart who had been Sarah's patient for years, approached her with tears in her eyes. "You've sacrificed everything for this community, dear. We know about the money you spent to save that man. We took up a collection." She pressed a wrinkled envelope into Sarah's hands. Inside was $347 in small bills and coins, representing the generous hearts but empty pockets of Millbrook's residents. Sarah sat in her old car that evening, clutching the envelope of donated money and staring at the hospital that had been her life's work. The building looked tired and defeated, its windows dark, its emergency room doors locked. "Maybe I was wrong, Michael," she whispered to her brother's memory. "Maybe kindness isn't enough to change the world after all." Just as despair threatened to overwhelm her completely, a convoy of 6 black Mercedes sedans appeared at the end of the street. The cars moved with purpose and authority, their tinted windows reflecting the streetlights like dark mirrors. The entire town seemed to hold its breath as the vehicles parked in perfect formation in front of the hospital. From the last car emerged a distinguished man in his 60s, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expensive suit tailored to perfection. He carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to power and wealth. "I'm Richard Carter," he announced to the gathering crowd, his voice carrying easily across the parking lot. "Chief Executive Officer of Carter Industries. I've come to collect my son." From the first car stepped Alex, but he was transformed. Gone were the simple clothes of a recovering patient. He wore an impeccably tailored black suit, his hair styled, his bearing confident and commanding. Yet when his eyes found Sarah in the crowd, they held the same warmth and tenderness she remembered from his hospital bed. Sarah felt as though the ground was shifting beneath her feet. "Alex," she called out, her voice barely audible above the murmur of the crowd. "Who are you really?" Alex walked toward her, each step measured and deliberate. The crowd parted before him like water, sensing the gravity of the moment. "Sarah," he said, his voice gentle despite the formal circumstances, I owe you the truth. My full name is Alexander Carter. I'm the sole heir to Carter Industries, a company worth $15 billion. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. $15 billion. While she had been worrying about his recovery, about how he would survive without insurance or money, he could have bought the entire hospital without thinking twice about the cost. 6 months ago, I walked away from my family and my responsibilities, Alex continued, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. I was tired of the emptiness, the superficiality, the constant pressure to be someone I didn't want to be. I wanted to discover what life was like for ordinary people, to find meaning beyond profit margins and board meetings. Sarah felt betrayed and foolish. So this was all just some kind of experiment to you? Playing poor while I worried about how you'd pay for your medications? While I used my rent money to save your life? Her voice was rising now, years of suppressed emotion finally breaking free. No, Alex said firmly, stepping closer despite her obvious anger. Those days in the hospital were the most genuine of my entire life. For the first time, someone cared about me not because of my money or my family name, but because I was human. You loved me when I was nobody, when I had nothing to offer you but gratitude. Richard Carter stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable with the public nature of this conversation. Alexander, we need to discuss your future with the company. This has gone on long enough. But Alex held up a hand, never taking his eyes off Sarah. You taught me what real love looks like, Sarah, what true generosity means. You showed me that the most valuable things in life can't be bought or sold. You saved more than my life that night. You saved my soul. Before Sarah could respond, Alex dropped to one knee in front of the entire town. Sarah Miller, you spent your last $500 to save a stranger. Now let me spend everything I have to save your dream. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an official-looking document. I've already begun the process of purchasing St. Mary's Hospital from Great Care Corporation, but I don't want to just save it. I want to transform it. The crowd fell completely silent, the only sound the whisper of wind through the bare trees. Alex's voice carried clearly in the crisp winter air. I'm committing $50 million to completely rebuild St. Mary's Hospital. We'll create a state-of-the-art medical facility that will serve this entire region. And here's the most important part. All medical care will be free for any family earning less than $50,000 a year. Mrs. Watson gasped and clutched her chest. Several people began to cry. Sarah stood frozen, unable to process what she was hearing. But I have one condition, Alex continued, still on his knee before her. Sarah Miller must be the chief administrator of the new St. Mary's Hospital. She will have complete authority over all medical decisions and patient care policies. No, Sarah exclaimed, stepping backward. I'm just a night shift nurse. I don't know anything about running a hospital, especially one worth $50 million. I can't take that responsibility. The former hospital administrator, Morrison, who had been watching from the edge of the crowd, pushed forward angrily. This is insane. You can't hand over a $50 million facility to a nurse with no administrative experience. I've been managing healthcare facilities for 20 years. Other members of the hospital's old leadership began voicing their objections, their faces red with indignation. We can't take orders from someone who used to empty bedpans, one of the senior doctors shouted. This is completely unprofessional. For a moment, Sarah felt herself shrinking back, intimidated by their credentials and their confidence. But then she thought of Emma, the 5-year-old girl who had died because she couldn't afford treatment. She thought of her brother Michael, and of every patient she had held while they cried in fear or pain. Something fierce and powerful awakened inside her. You're right, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. I am just a nurse, but I'm proud to be a nurse. I'm the one who has been here 18 hours a day for the past 10 years. I'm the one who knows every patient's name, who remembers their children's birthdays, who has held their hands when they were afraid. She turned to face Morrison and the other administrators directly. You manage this hospital from your air-conditioned offices, looking at spreadsheets and profit margins. But when was the last time any of you actually talked to a patient? When did you last comfort a scared child or explain a diagnosis to a worried family? The crowd began to murmur in agreement. Sarah felt their support, giving her strength. I may not have business degrees or administrative experience, but I have something more valuable. I understand what it means to need help and not be able to afford it. I know what it's like to watch someone you love die because of money. One by one, The nurses who had worked alongside Sarah began stepping forward. "I stand with Sarah," announced Janet Morrison, the head of pediatric nursing. "She's the heart of this hospital." Within minutes, 12 of the 15 remaining nurses had moved to stand behind Sarah in a show of solidarity. Dr. Peterson, who had performed Alex's surgery, came forward as well. "Sarah Miller has more integrity and compassion in her little finger than most people have in their entire bodies. If she's willing to take on this responsibility, she has my full support." Even some of the patients' families who had been affected by the hospital's closure policies began speaking up. "Sarah paid for my mother's medication out of her own pocket when we couldn't afford it," called out one woman. "She's been taking care of all of us for years." Alex rose to his feet, his eyes shining with pride and love. "This is why I love you, Sarah. Not because you're perfect, but because you're real. Because you care more about people than about policies. Because you have the courage to fight for what's right, even when you're afraid." Richard Carter, who had been watching this entire scene with growing amazement, stepped forward. "Son," he said quietly, "in all my years of business, I've never seen a boardroom display this kind of passion and loyalty. Perhaps it's time for our family to learn a different way of measuring success." Sarah looked around at the faces surrounding her, the people who had become her extended family over the years of caring for them and their loved ones. She thought of all the lives that could be saved if she had the resources and authority to implement real change. Slowly, she nodded. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady now. "But not alone. We'll do this together, as a community. Every decision will be made with the patient's best interests as the top priority. No one will ever again be turned away because they can't afford care." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause that seemed to echo off the hospital walls and rise into the winter sky. Alex stepped forward and took Sarah's hands in his. "There's one more thing," he said softly, so only she could hear. "I love you, Sarah Miller, not because you saved my life, but because you showed me how to live it with purpose." Before Sarah could respond, he was kissing her, and the crowd's cheers grew even louder. In that moment, surrounded by the people she had dedicated her life to serving, with the promise of a future where no one would have to choose between financial security and human compassion, Sarah felt her brother Michael's presence as strongly as if he were standing beside her. 6 months later, the construction crews broke ground on the new St. Mary's Medical Center. Alex had kept every promise, investing not just money but his time and energy into creating something unprecedented. A world-class medical facility that operated on the principle that healthcare was a human right, not a privilege for those who could afford it. Sarah stood in her new office, looking out at the construction site where her dream was taking shape in steel and concrete. On her desk was a framed photo of Michael, smiling in his high school graduation cap and gown. Beside it was a letter from Lisa, Emma's mother, who had been hired as the new pediatric social worker. "We did it, Michael," Sarah whispered to her brother's photograph. "We kept our promise." The door opened, and Alex entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. Even after all these months, Sarah still felt her heart skip when she saw him. He had given up his corner office in Manhattan to work alongside her, learning the healthcare industry from the ground up with the same dedication he had once applied to corporate finance. "The new cardiac wing will be ready next month," he reported, settling into the chair across from her desk. "And the board approved your proposal for the mobile clinic program. We'll be able to reach patients in the rural areas who can't make it to the main facility." Sarah smiled, feeling a deep satisfaction that went beyond personal happiness. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real. A year ago, I was using my last $500 to save a stranger, and now we're creating something that will save thousands of lives." Alex reached across the desk and took her hand. "That $500 was never just about saving one life, Sarah. It was about proving that love and compassion are more powerful than fear and greed. It was about showing that one person, willing to sacrifice for others, can change the world." Outside their window, the winter sun was setting over Millbrook, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The new St. Mary's Medical Center rose from the ground like a cathedral of hope, its windows reflecting the light like beacons calling to all who needed healing and care. In the distance, the bells of the old church began to chime the evening hour, their sound carrying across the town like a benediction. Sarah closed her eyes and listened, feeling the presence of all those who had been saved and all those yet to be saved, knowing that Michael's spirit lived on in every life they touched. The greatest investments, she had learned, were not measured in dollars, but in the immeasurable value of human compassion. Her $500 had purchased more than a surgery. It had bought a future where love would always triumph over indifference, where no one would ever again have to choose between financial survival and moral duty. And in the growing darkness of the winter evening, the lights of the new hospital shone like stars, promising that hope would always find a way to survive, and that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can grow into miracles that change the world forever.